Hi there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking, and great to have you along for another episode of Dream Fights. And this is one I'm really looking forward to. It's an all Aussie affair, and it's going to be one of the best ones we've had, I am sure. Let's bring in my co-host for this episode, as always, Grant Tassie Brown and Mike Altamura. How are we, guys? Oh, hang on, I've muted you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, good, thanks, Lyndon.
Sorry, I can't tell you how I'm feeling if you have me silenced, Lyndon. But
sorry about that. I tried to adjust the volume and I've muted you, so apologies for that. But we got there in the end. But look,
Lyndon,
yes.
I've got a question for you.
Yes, mate.
There's no Peter tonight.
No, there's no Peter. No, again, and
I'm just saying, there's no Peter. Where's
and the thing is, he actually would have been extremely useful for this episode because he was close with both athletes.
Yeah, he was. No,
but Mike, do you know like the character on the books? Where's Wally?
You see my beanie. It says Daddy. I think you've been fathering Peter so much in these trivias that now he's petrified to come on any of Lyndon's platforms. I think that's what's transpired.
I should be wearing that. But you know what? Where's Wally? It could be Peter. We could have to find him like a needle in a haystack.
Where's Pete? Well, look, I miss him. You might not. Oh, yeah, actually, you do because you want to keep racking up victories.
You miss beating him up in the quiz.
I miss Peter's discussions, especially because when we have Peter's input, he just, like, you'll think that he'll go one direction and then he'll just come to you with a whole slew of facts out of left field. And it's like, wow, like I'd almost underestimated Peter in this discussion point, and now he's just completely blown my mind away. So, yeah, I miss kind of his quirky facts at times regarding certain bouts.
We'll get him back at some stage. But let's get on to this week's episode because I've been really looking forward to this one. It's going to be a very, I won't say delicate type of thing because we're obviously massive fans of both of them. It's an all-Aussie affair, of course. Of course, everyone's watching those who we're talking about. Let's get it out in the open there. Mike, who have you got for this week's episode?
We have got, and I'm sure you can see that, the great featherweight, WBC featherweight champion of the world, Johnny FAMECHON, versus the great WBC, WBA bantamweight champion of the world, Lionel Rose, two of Australia's finest.
Yeah, it certainly was, and there's the graphic there. And yes, two of the legends or officially legends of Australian boxing in the Hall of Fame, Johnny FAMECHON, Lionel Rose. Both Melbourne boys, and what a fight. Now, Mike, probably a silly question, but what made you come up with this dream fight?
This was actually one of the biggest hypotheticals of the 60s and 70s within Australian boxing. So for an 8-month period in 1969, believe it or not, two Victorian boys ruled the world. So Johnny FAMECHON, like I said, WBC featherweight world champion. But keep in mind, that's in an era where there was no bridging weight class. There was no junior featherweight. So feather 126. Lionel was world bantamweight champion, 118 pounds, but 19 years of age, struggling with weight. There was considerable discussion about Lionel stepping up and challenging Famo for the WBC featherweight world title. And there was a lot of hypotheticals to the point that the graphic I just showed, so that was taken at the TV Ringside Studios, and they actually had what was just like a very, very light 3-round exhibition, and it gave people a little bit of an insight into how it potentially may play out. So it whet their appetites, but alas, Famo lost his world championship to Vicente Saldivar and then opted to call it a day, and both guys become very, very good friends in retirement. So it was never revisited, but for a short pocket of history, and for many years thereafter, for 50 plus years thereafter, I think all of us that are entrenched in the history of Australian boxing sit back and just wonder how these two fighters, these two fine defensive fighters, how their styles would have married up against one another. Because you can discuss it, Famo was naturally the bigger guy, but Lionel developed into a guy that went on to fight for the 130-pound world title. He defeated at 135 Guts Ishimatsu, who was the future WBC lightweight world champion. So it's not even necessarily a matter of size or anything of that nature. It just would have been a matter of timing.
Yeah, geez, Tassie, without obviously revealing who you think's going to win, we'll do it at the end, of course. But how tough was this one to get your head around when you're thinking about who's going to win?
Yeah, I think I told you last week, guys. As I said, like again, mentioned to my family. My grandfather was a massive Johnny FAMECHON fan. He liked the pure boxer. He liked the the great the great trainer Ambrose Palmer. He liked the great Ambrose Palmer style, the boxer, the jab, the move. My dad really liked, the Lionel Rose style, and they had this conversation many a time, and sometimes got heated at the dinner table between my father and grandfather. God rest both their souls. Um, you know, I had the pleasure of meeting both men. I'm sure you guys did, being from Victoria, but from a Tasmanian, you don't meet everyone. I got the opportunity to meet both men, Famo on two occasions, and Lionel. I got the opportunity to actually sit back at Charlie Perkins's house, who was a great Indigenous man who fought for the Aboriginal people and a great soccer player. He hosted Lionel Rose, Tony Mundine Senior, and Anthony Mundine, and the Indigenous boxing team. And so I got to listen to Lionel play on the guitar. I think it was about 99. It was.
Wow.
So that was amazing. Yeah, got a photo, and so that was pretty special. What can you say? Like, you talk Australian boxing. Jimmy Carruthers was our first official, even though me and Mike both spoke about Young Griffo the other day. But then you got Rose and Famison, and they're both from Victoria, both in the pretty much same era, and just that one division apart. I mean, Lionel got kept down the banner weight way too long, which I feel like if there was a super banner now, it would have been perfect. You know what I mean? So I believe the weight loss, and I've seen some of the docos and even the movie about Lionel, how they used to really have to get that weight off, and you can't get the best out of a fighter when you got to. So I mean, the fight against Tutu Castillo, which he struggled, but he got the decision. The loss to the great Ruben Olivares. He's not saying he would have beat Ruben anyway, but fighting with that a disadvantage of being weight drained. If Rose could have went up the featherweight, he would have been very strong. And obviously, the Ingo Famison, it would have been huge. It would have been a respectable build up. Would have been no. They're both gentlemen. There would have been no trash talk and none of that. But it would have been. It's probably our fight that. Probably if you took a vote on true Australian boxing fans, some might say they wish it was Fenech and Ellis or Michaels Fenech, but I think your true boxing fans would want Rose Famison.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we get into the records and some highlights of the fighters, we've obviously got to go through last week's dream fight, and it was Pernell Whitaker versus Roberto Duran. Now, from memory, I went for Whitaker. Mike, you might have went for Whitaker as well.
Yeah.
And Tassie went for Duran. So
just.
Yeah, it was a tough one. And we probably had our best poll that we've ever had, to be honest. We had probably about 150 people that voted, which was great, and a lot of feedback, and that's what you want. That's why we do it. But the result of the poll came out like this: Pernell Whitaker, 53% over Roberto Duran, who was 47%. Now that, I must admit, guys, was a surprise. Even though I went for Whitaker, Mike, I was a little bit surprised that the majority of people would still go for Duran. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that credit to our audience. I think that seeing that kind of balance, if it was if it was 60-40 or 70-30, either way, it would surprise you. I think that
it was very close.
A lot of our audience will say they have really sound knowledge when it comes to fighters of the last 30, 40 years. And I think that, ordinarily it could have even been skewed more in Whitaker's way, given the volume of highlights. But Duran's a legend that's transcended eras.
Yeah.
So because of obviously the fabulous score and his involvement with that quartet, I think that, the awareness of Duran's high, but I think that what it reflects is just a lot of people acknowledge that of all the styles, somebody like Pernell Whitaker is the trickiest one for Duran.
Yeah, well, Tassie, I mean, we won't go on for too long, but when you think of these two fight, or Duran in particular, Whitaker, when you think about it, the only lightweight in history that would have a real legitimate chance. I thought Chavez was another one, but really, to most people, Whitaker's the only one that really would have, you could make a case for.
I want to give our audience a massive thumbs up, because to me it really shows that a lot of you guys, you really do know boxing, because I thought it'd be just all Duran, because not that many people, unless you're really a boxing fan, know Pernell Whitaker. I don't think he's as mainstream as he should be. So I'm actually really shocked, and I really want to give credit to our audience, because the fact that you guys know who Pernell Whitaker is, the fact that you guys believe Whitaker is as good as what he is, I reckon that's great, because I thought it might have been a whitewash via our viewers.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean, Mike? Pernell's not probably your mainstream, like he should be. He's top 10 of all time in my book, but publicly he's not as probably mainstream as he should be. So that's pretty cool.
And before I let you comment there, Mike, and the thing about it, I think with the votes too, I think all the ones that voted for Whitaker, 100% of those people, so every single person that went for Whitaker said he would win by decision, which is, I think the way we all would see it. You couldn't sort of see him stopping Duran unless it was a cut or something, of course. But about 3/4 of the ones that voted for Duran said he would win by knockout. So it was really really intriguing. But that's why we do these shows, just to create discussion, as long as it's done in a respectful way, not being told that we don't know what we're talking about. We don't like that. But hey, if you want to be constructive, then bring it on. We'll get on to this week's one, of course. Johnny FAMECHON and Lionel Rose. Mike, we'll get on to Johnny FAMECHON first. 56 wins, 5 losses, 6 draws, 20 by knockout. Was the Australian featherweight champion in 64, the Commonwealth featherweight champion in 67, and of course the WBC world featherweight champion in 1969. I'll put a few of his biggest wins there. I'm sure you can add a few to that. And of course the biggest one probably been the win over Jose Allegra in 69 to win the title. And of course they share a common opponent in fighting Harada as well, and of course inducted in the Aussie Boxing Hall of Fame. So, Mike, I've listed a few fighters there. You can probably list a few others if you'd like that I've missed. But overall, just a wonderful career by Famo.
Yeah, and the other thing is also to keep in mind that the overwhelming majority of those losses and draws come when he was still a minor. So he turned pro at, 16 years of age, no amateur career, and then retired at 24. So really the last 5 years of his career, with the exception of the Saldivar fight and arguably the controversial first bout with fighting Harada, in which an error was found on Willie Pep's scorecard, and it was initially a draw, and people felt that maybe the error would have been a slide to Harada's way. Actually, the decision went to Famo. But, with the exception really of those 2 nights, which is at the absolute pinnacle world title fights, he was near untouchable the last 5 years of his career, and really retired with plenty left in the locker. But yeah, just watching these highlights here, I mean, I think was it Jeff Fennick who said the other week, he was Floyd Mayweather before Floyd Mayweather, and you can see why he made that comment, just because of this defensive dexterity. And Famo wasn't everyone's favourite fighter in the sense that he's just so defensively sound and technically oriented. He wasn't a KO hitter by any stretch, but if you're a real boxing purist, you can really appreciate everything he's doing here. Just so depth on his feet.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, Tassie? As Mike said, he was pretty much Mayweather before his time, but it's amazing to look at the style he had there. He had the classic cross-arm defence, and just a brilliant tactician and defensive fighter, wasn't he?
Oh, mate, he was before his time, especially in Australia. I mean, the movement, the defence, to be able to hit and not be hit. I mean, he is a pure boxer, and I made a comment you know, in his last fight, and like, you know, that's why I like Harry Garsight's footwork. I said he reminds me of shades of Famo. Just that you don't see many good boxers these days. These days, more guys are trying just to walk you down and
Yeah.
you know, and take one to give one, or take them on the gloves and have that sort of Canelo style, and not. But to see a guy that moves around elegantly and hit and not be hit, and I said, you know, that you know it's good to see someone like Garsight, shades of Famo these days, just the movement and the boxing. Because at the end of the day, you know, it is boxing. This game is boxing. I mean, I know people like the excitement and to see guys slug it out and get cut and get knocked down and get up like Gaddy Ward, but I was always sort of grown up that it is boxing. If you can hit and not be hit, the jab is the best punch in the book. I try and teach all my students. Don't neglect the left hand or your southpaw, whatever, your lead hand. Everything comes off the lead hand. It's, you know, and I think a lot of coaches are losing that these days. Yeah, just the fundamentals of just boxing.
And Mike, before we get on to Lionel Rose there, isn't it just a twist of ironic fate that after everything that he'd been through in his career, being so defensively minded, barely had a glove laid on him. But of course, he had that horrific accident back in '91 and ended up with brain injuries. And of course, I think he come good later in his years. Obviously, he passed away just recently. But it's just, you know, the Mother Nature can be a bit harsh on you sometimes.
It's the cruelest twist of fate that you could have. I mean, to retire from boxing and be such an advocate for brain health and as such a great ambassador for the sport. People forget actually both Lionel and Famo, but Famo especially was such an advocate for the betterment of how fighters are treated in the sport. He was an advocate for unions. He was an advocate for regular brain checks and brain examinations and more stringent testing with medicals and things of that nature, and really was one of those guys in the 70s that was an active voice in the community. And then sometimes you go back and watch Australian fight tapes from the 80s and you hear the input of Famo, and there was never an agenda. He was just a pure class act across the board. And I think that's what is so heartbreaking about the accident, is that, you know, he had a kind of a very witty way of dealing with it and a self-deprecating way to deal with it to an extent. But, you know, nevertheless, that was a gentleman in the prime of his life that was affected by a brain injury. And it wasn't occurred in the ring. Like we said, he retired with full bill of health, and they said that when they found him in the accident unconscious on the road, that when they brought him in, he was a John Doe, and they thought that it was a man in their 20s. You've got to think about that. You know, this is a guy, what would have he been then, like 45, 46 years of age, and they thought it was a man in his 20s, the kind of condition he was in.
Yeah.
So it's a shame, but I think that Johnny will always be remembered as an Australian boxing legend and such a great ambassador for the sport and for how any athlete should carry themselves with the absolute utmost humility. And, you know, sometimes I go back and read these magazines and I see the way Famo, and also on the other side of the fence, how Lionel carried himself too with the media and in interviews. And you just think, you know, no one has an excuse to be brash or rude or abrasive or dismissive to media or fans or anybody when you see two such upstanding examples in our history.
Yeah, no, spot on, mate. I think especially when it came to Famo, just, you know, when he passed away a week or two ago, to see the amount of social media posts, all with a smiling Famo in his chair, you know, just that goes to show. There was pretty much every person I knew in the sport had a photo with Famo, and you know, and every single one of them he had a beaming smile as well. So it was great to see, and just a great, as you said, an ambassador for Australia and boxing especially. Let's get on to Lionel Rose, guys. 42-11, 12 KOs. Australian Bantamweight champion in 66, the WBC and WBA featherweight champion in 1968. And you can see some of his wins there. The big one, obviously, over Fighting Harada, and of course in the Australian Boxing Hall of Fame as well. So, Tazzy, just on Lionel, then you mentioned before that the horrific issues that he had with weight. How much better a fighter do you think he could have been if he actually had like you said, there was a super bantamweight division, or even better, gone up to featherweight?
Well, Lyndon, I mean, anyone who's fought and had to lose big amounts of weight, um, you know, leading up to the fight, especially back then, because there was no 24-hour weighing, so you same day weighing. And of course, he would have been a lot better. They really had to boil him down, and you know, they didn't have even the tricks that you got today of doing things and all that stuff. So look, yeah, I mean, he would have been a lot better. He was quite a solid build, and he would have been a perfect featherweight or super bantamweight. So, as I said, I feel like they kept him down too long. I blame Jack Rennie for that. I don't think. I think he really should have allowed Lionel to go up. So, I grew up resenting Jack Rennie. From what I heard from my father and grandfather, I don't think he didn't look after Lionel as good as he should have.
Mike, do you agree with that? That Jack Rennie had a lot to answer for keeping Lionel down at that weight for so long?
The money's considerably different when you carry a world championship, especially in that era, to just fighting non-title bouts and biding your time and hoping to secure a shot. But I think that, like Tazzy said, I mean, he was growing. When you got a guy that captures a world title at 19 years of age, and if you look at Lionel's weights, he turned pro at 123 pounds, and then he was maintaining 118 all the way from being a 15-year-old kid to, into his early 20s. And I just think that eventually his body just seized, and I really think that it affected the whole pathway in his career because, when you're sucking someone dry for so long. And the other thing is too, where I think historically Lionel gets underestimated a bit, is all of his world title defenses come against guys ranked in the top 3 contenders in the world. So Castillo, from memory, was number 1. Rudkin was number 2. Sakurai was either 2 or 3 and was an undefeated Olympic gold medalist. When you look at the caliber of fighters, Rudkin, arguably one of the greatest European bantamweights ever, even though he didn't win a world title. So you're fighting guys at that level, hard 15-round fights. He didn't score any stoppages as a champion, right? Hard 15-round fights, grueling pace, and you're sucking yourself dry every defense. You can't tell me that doing that 2 or 3 times too many doesn't burn the best instincts, the best skills, the best capabilities, the heart, the determination. You can't tell me it doesn't affect those things irreversibly.
Like you said, Mike, look at the credible opponents you just named, and that's without mentioning the one that ended his reign, Ruben Olivari. So he fought the very best that was around in his era, the very best.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a different style back then, but I felt like Lionel a little bit once they took him to George Panasas out of California, and they were making exceptional purses with Castillo, and then of course to return and fight Rockabye Ruben Olivares, who, we've spoken on this program, one of the probably at least one of the top 2 or 3 Mexican fighters ever. A lot of people make the case that he's the greatest. Yes. I just think that it's easy in hindsight to look at it and say they shouldn't have done this or that, but I think that financial considerations and financial decisions were made that weren't in Lionel's best interest in terms of his longevity as an athlete. And I think that given his standing, given where both him and Famo was, there should have been a greater push to endeavour to make that belt in Australia in late 1969.
Yeah, no, you're right, geez. And it's amazing we've got, a dream fight of 2 fighters from the same era and the same country and the same city. It's amazing. So it just would have been great. But before we get on to the the results here, Mike, just tell me a little bit, just quickly, Mike, about the legacy of these 2 guys. If the fans out there a little bit unsure, I'm assuming they know who these guys are. Just tell us just quickly, just a brief summary of these guys, what they contributed to sport in this country and boxing especially.
Lionel Rose is our first ever Indigenous world champion. So there can only ever be one first ever. And there was a lot of great Indigenous fighters before him, the likes of Ali Bennett, who was a world-rated bantamweight, huge draw cards like Georgie Bracken in Sydney. But Lionel was the first ever world champion, and that's massive legacy. What people also what they don't comprehend, I should say, not that they don't understand, because it's our job to educate, is that this was an 8-bout era. And, fighting Harada is across the board. Think of Naoya Inoue and all the other great Japanese fighters. Fighting Harada across the board, greatest Japanese fighter of all time. And that's what a 19-year-old Lionel Rose defeated for the world championship. And, people can say aged out, whatever. No, Harada then went up and was deprived due to a poor decision against Famo of capturing a third world title in still an 8-bout era in the featherweight world title. So that's who Lionel beat. Lionel beat Chuchu Castillo, who, again, controversial decision, but still to run tight with him. Castillo went on to be one of the great bantamweights of that era, went on to be world champion. Like I said earlier, he beat Katsushi Matsu, went on to win WBC title. Post-prime, he come back, he fought Numata and lost the extremely tight decision for the 130-pound, newly formed 130-pound world title. I think that when you look at Lionel, I know I rate him historically as Australia's greatest fighter ever because I think he's got the most significant wins by an Australian ever. I hear people talk of Jeff Horn over Pacquiao and, recently people talking about Opetaia versus Breedis, but they don't understand the context of what Lionel accomplished. So I think that without question, whether you think he's the greatest or whatever, he's at least in your conversation for top 3 fighters ever.
Yeah.
Johnny FAMECHON, without question, our greatest defensive fighter, period. Protege of the great Ambrose Palmer. And you go back and watch him and you see that his style holds up the test of time. And to me, not only, a top 5 Australian fighter ever, but, pound for pound, but Johnny really is the staple of, if you're looking to model a fighter's career, get in and out, get in, make your defenses, fight at a healthy weight, make your money, retire when you've got a little bit left in the tank so that you've got your faculties intact, and be a great representative of the sport. Like Johnny FAMECHON, to me, was everything that's great about Australian boxing. And the fact now that, Dan Andrews, politically, you can say whatever you please about him, but the fact that he's understood Johnny's significance and we're going to see a state funeral for him to send him off is a great honour.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that. That's all.
And I think that you look at Johnny, state funeral, Lionel Rose, state funeral. That's not an honour extended to people that just win world titles. It's extended to great humans. And I think that when we look back on these two, not only were they great boxing champions or great people, but they were great ambassadors for the sport and for their people as well.
And the country, of course. So, yeah, no, very well said there, mate. That's great. So, without further ado, this is the hard part. This is where we've got to pick a winner. So, Mike, you chose this fight. So, who wins and why?
This is the only time in show history where I've considered a draw. I love both guys so much.
Yeah.
And, when you look at what they achieved, there's arguments on both sides of the fence. Like every time I watch one of the fighters' highlights, I flip-flop. I'm like, all right, so Famo's so crafty and so good at adjusting. How does Lionel adjust? If he gets frustrated and drops a few rounds, how does Lionel adjust back to him? And then I look at Lionel and I just think he's just got blistering hand speed. And Lionel was smart enough that he could jab on the front foot and hunt you down. Or if you were a fast, nifty fighter, he had the dexterity to draw you into, as we call, like a vacuum, and suck you into trying to chase him and jab you at range, and then had a lethal right hand. His right hand was so much more solid than 12 knockouts in 41 fights reflects. So I flip-flop on it, but I take one fight as a bit of a guide. And that's it. If we're looking at the same era, so we're looking at 1969, both fighters essentially at their peak. Lionel outboxed Harada. I'm not going to say it was easy, but he comfortably outboxed him. Famo, even though the second outing, Famo did something near inhumane and took chances and marched Harada down late and knocked him out in round 14. which he should forever be revered for. And in Japan, of all places,
Yeah.
I think Famo struggled a bit with Harada the first bout and was struggling with him in the second bout for 13 rounds. Whereas I just look at when Lionel was at his absolute peak. I just think Lionel's peak was just that grade higher, which when I compute it, think moving up in weight, healthier Lionel Rose, maybe that little bit of hand speed that he possessed over Famo is just the difference. But it's a tight fight. It's an 8 to 7, 9 to 6 kind of bout in Lionel Rose's favour, but I wouldn't begrudge anyone that rolled with Famo.
All right, so a 15-round decision to Lionel Rose. Tassie, move to you, mate. Who wins and why?
Yeah, I'm going to go the same as Mike with Lionel. Always, as I said, my father went with Lionel, my grandfather went with Famo, and I've always said Lionel in a great bout. I mean, Lionel having fought the better clove opposition and having that bit of weight, increase to be able to be a bit more healthier and a bit more rejuvenated. And I believe that, everything Famo does and does well, I think Lionel does a little bit better, and it'd be a very, very good bout. But I think Lionel wins a close 15-round decision.
Okay. Well, like both of you guys, I was so torn, especially what you said, Mike, about I watched Famo and then I watched Lionel Rose, and it's like, oh, geez, I'm with you. Can we just have a universal draw here? But we can't do that. We've got to pick someone. Look, almost mirror images of each other in certain aspects and the way they fought and everything else. And obviously you mentioned fighting Harada there, Mike. But look, I am going to be... It seems to be a bit of a theme. I am going to be different in this one. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go for Johnny FAMECHON in a razor-thin decision. I'm going to say 8 to 7. And look, just one of those things. Look, it was just too hard to split. But if I had to pick one, I'm going to go with Famo. I just think... I don't know. Obviously, just a naturally slightly bigger man for starters, but I think his conditioning and endurance, even though like Lionel Rose was great, I just think Famo's maybe in a really fast-paced fight, Famo's conditioning might just sort of see him through in a 15-round fight, even though, as I said, Lionel Rose fought 15 rounds many times as well, but I just got a feeling the fight would be fought at a super fast pace, and I just think Famo's conditioning and maybe being a little bit bigger would get him home in the end. And I just think he's a little bit more, I won't say polished, but a little bit more disciplined as far as keeping his shape for the whole fight goes. And I just think that will be enough to get him over the line. So for me, Johnny FAMECHON in a very, very close, probably a split decision. I'm going to say 8 to 7 in Famo's favour. But like you guys, it was a very, very tough one to pick, and certainly don't want to argue with you guys either way, because it was just one of those fights where anyone could win and on a particular day. And really, Mike, when you think about it could have been a classic trilogy between these two, couldn't it? That's how even they were.
It's one of those fights that, especially when you size up how it would play out, it's not going to be a barn burner, but it's going to have you holding onto your seat for the entire period, because it's high-speed chess. We hear about people talk about high-speed chess all the time, but this would have been defensive mastery on both sides of the fence, and I think that it would have justified potentially a trilogy, because every round would have been nip and tuck. It would have been tight. It would have been what you like, and Famo, like you said, if Lionel took some chances, undue chances, Famo will make him pay for his lack of shape. If Famo fell behind in rounds, what kind of chances would he take? Would he be prepared to kind of step outside of his domain like he did in the rematch with Harada and start winging shots to get him out of there? Or would he be cautious of the right hand of Lionel, which he always said carried a lot of power? So I think that, definitely it's a fight that there could have been a trilogy. I think although both guys became great friends, it was a shame we never saw it in Australian boxing, because I don't think ever historically we've had a bout where we had two guys absolutely elite like this. Mundine and Green were great, but they weren't the two best super middleweights in the world at that time. Gil was best middleweight in the world. We had, or thereabouts, I should say, only unified champion at the time. We had Sam Solomon with a bout but neither of those two were Gennady Golovkin. But this was an era where we had two guys that were the absolute man in their weight class
In an
and were
eight-belt
near
era.
enough to fight, and we never saw it.
Nah, very well said. So Tassie, look, it's back to you for next week's episode. Have you got someone in mind, or are you going to keep us in suspense?
No, I'm going somewhere different.
Okay, I'm not sure I like the sound of that, but go ahead.
I'm going to Japan.
Okay.
I'm having Fight in the Rada versus Naui Inoue.
Oh, gee.
Wow.
One for the Japanese fans.
Well, what do we want to go? Do we want to go
I love it.
fly or Bantam? Because they both, what version of Rada? What do you reckon, Mike?
I think Bantam, wouldn't you say, Mike?
Yeah, I would go Bantam. Go the guy that conquered Joffrey.
Yeah.
We'll go Bantam. Harada versus Inoue. You Japanese fans, we want plenty of views.
I love it, mate. I love the whole, mixing it up. We've obviously seen it in the classic fights going back to the 40s. I think it's fantastic. And to have an all-Japanese fight, I reckon it's awesome, mate. So good for thinking outside the box. And I'm looking forward to that one. I'm not really probably looking forward to picking a winner, but it should be a ripper.
Just before we go, I've got to say hello to Big Bill Hack in Norfolk, Tasmania. He watches every week. He loves Lyndon, loves Mike, even loves Peter.
Jeez.
And he truly loves the great Tassie Brown. On your Big Billy Hack.
Thanks for watching, Billy.
Keep swinging them up there in Norfolk and chopping wood, my friend.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, mate. No, well done. Thanks to everyone out there that watch every week. The Dream Fights, it's probably our best episode best show that we do that gets the most feedback. I think the last one a couple of weeks ago, Sanchez and Barrera, I think it was about 3,000 views and lots of colourful comments, let's put it that way. But I'm sure this will get the fire stoked in the Aussie fans, just like next week we'll get the Japanese fans going.
But before we leave,
yep.
Before we leave tonight and say our goodbyes, I still don't know the meaning behind the daddy beanie. I won't be able to sleep. It's going to get to me all night. Mike, why do you have a pink beanie that says daddy?
I've told you this on previous programs that it's I've been here fathering the malcontents of Australian boxing for 20 years, so it's only fitting. But I will say this: if I pick against Naoya Inoue next week, I'm going to get fathered by Mr. Ohashi, who's the head of the gym that Inoue trains out of. So I've got to think very, very cautiously and businesslike.
Choose your words carefully.
For my pick, because I don't want to offend my good friend Mr. Ohashi.
Yeah.
Mike, do you get Christmas cards from all your former Australian fighters that you managed?
No, unfortunately not, including the ones that I've lost significant money on. No. But you know what? It's part of the business. You know, you win some, you lose some. You always do things out of the goodness of your heart. If your intentions are pure in the sport. And the other thing is too, we partake in boxing because we love it. You can talk about, I've had these chats with you offline before, Tassie. We can talk about, I'm in the sport because I want to give back, or this or that or whatever. End of the day, we're all pursuing our own dreams. So I'm just grateful that I've been able to keep living the dream and keep kicking the can down the road from finding a quote-unquote real job since I've been 17 years of age. So just let the good times roll.
I'm going to get a T-shirt for next week that says Daddy as well.
I want one of those beanies,
save it for when Peter's back on the show.
Nah, that's awesome job, guys. Awesome pick there, Pete. I thought I did pretty well the other week with Whittaker and Duran, but mate, that's a great one for Aussie
You
fans.
just called him Pete.
Oh, sorry, I call you Pete. Sorry, Mike.
Do I look like a loose trivia?
Sorry, I've just got Pete on the brain lately. I apologise.
Any day, boy, any day.
All right, guys. Thanks for that. We'll see you next week. See you, fellas.